The sun bathed the Trump family estate in a golden glow, its sprawling gardens meticulously trimmed to perfection. Rose bushes, imported orchids, and fountains shaped like mythical creatures adorned the grounds, a testament to wealth and grandeur. A string quartet played in the background, their music a delicate thread weaving through the hum of well-dressed guests engaged in polite but hollow conversation. Barron Trump stood at the edge of the gathering, a tall figure clad in a tailored navy suit. His gaze wandered over the crowd, a sea of politicians, socialites, and business magnates, all sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries as if performing a choreographed dance. He felt like a ghost among them, present but unseen, existing on the periphery of a life that no longer felt like his own. He shifted uncomfortably, loosening his tie. His family had been in the spotlight his entire life, yet he'd never felt more invisible. Conversations around him buzzed about mergers and alliances, things he had no interest in. He scanned the garden for an escape, his eyes landing on the catering staff bustling at the far end of the lawn. Amid the black and white uniforms, one figure stood out. She wasn't like the others, her movements deliberate yet effortless, her dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail. There was something striking about her, a quiet confidence, a genuine warmth that seemed to radiate from her even as she carried a heavy tray of hors d'oeuvres. She was laughing softly with another server, and the sound, even from a distance, seemed to cut through the artificiality of the party. Barron found himself drawn toward her, compelled by an urge he couldn't quite define. He moved closer under the pretense of inspecting the hors d'oeuvres. As she turned toward him, their eyes met. Her gaze was direct, unguarded, a contrast to the practiced smiles and careful glances of the guests. "Can I offer you something?" she asked, her voice steady, her tone professional but not cold. For a moment, he forgot how to respond. He wasn't used to being spoken to without deference or pretense. I'm fine, thank you," he stammered, his usual composure slipping. She smiled faintly, her expression neither flirtatious nor dismissive, just genuine. "Let me know if you change your mind." She turned to serve another guest, leaving him standing there, oddly breathless. As she walked away, Barron's gaze lingered. He didn't even know her name, but something about her had stirred a curiosity deep within him, a curiosity about the world outside his gilded cage and the people who lived within it. For the first time that evening, the crowd faded into the background. The carefully curated perfection of his life seemed a little less significant, a little less suffocating. Something had shifted, though he couldn't quite explain what. He slipped back to the edge of the garden, his thoughts no longer on the party, but on the girl whose laugh had sounded like freedom. The park was quiet in the early afternoon, the kind of sanctuary Barron had grown to cherish. The manicured perfection of his family's estate was miles away, replaced by winding paths, old oaks, and the laughter of children playing in the distance. He often came here to think, to escape the expectations that seemed to trail him like a shadow. As he rounded a bend, he noticed a figure sitting on a weathered bench beneath a sprawling tree. It was her, the girl from the party. Her hair was loose today, a cascade of dark waves framing her face as she bent over a sketchpad. A charcoal pencil moved deftly in her hand, capturing something unseen to him. He hesitated before approaching, unsure why he was drawn to her again. Finally, he cleared his throat softly. "Mind if I sit here?" She looked up, surprised but not startled. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by a smile. "It's a free park," she said, scooting over to make room. Barron sat, watching as her pencil danced over the page. "You're an artist?" "Trying to be," she replied, her focus shifting back to the sketch. "It's more of a dream right now. What are you drawing?" She tilted the sketchpad slightly, revealing an intricate sketch of the park's fountain. It was more than a replica. It captured the life around it, from the birds perched on its edge to the shimmer of water cascading down. "It's beautiful," he said earnestly. She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing playfully. "You don't have to flatter me. You're not one of the guests tonight." He laughed, a sound he hadn't made in genuine amusement for weeks. "No, I'm serious. You have a talent for seeing things differently." For the next hour, they talked about her dream of attending art school, his restless dissatisfaction with his preordained path, and the little things they loved. By the time Barron rose to leave, he felt lighter, the weight of his name and legacy temporarily lifted. The charity event buzzed with activity, the Trump family estate transformed into a spectacle of opulence. Waiters in starched uniforms glided through the crowd, and crystal chandeliers sparkled beneath an expansive marquee. Barron lingered near the back of the room, avoiding the spotlight as always. He spotted Mia across the room, holding a tray of flutes filled with champagne. Her eyes darted nervously toward a supervisor barking orders at the staff. When she passed close enough, he stepped into her path. "Mia!" Her eyes widened. "You shouldn't. Follow me," he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. They slipped out through a side door, finding themselves in a quiet corridor. She exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. "That man's a tyrant." Barron smiled. "He won't find you here." She leaned against the wall, her posture relaxing. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I don't like seeing people treated like they're invisible." Her expression softened. "Thank you." They talked for a while, about the absurdity of the event, about life. She teased him about his polished manners, and he laughed at her witty comebacks. For a moment, the walls of wealth and status crumbled, leaving just two people sharing a connection. The dining room at the Trump mansion was imposing, its high ceilings and gilded decor meant to impress. Tonight, it felt oppressive to Barron as he sat across from his parents. "I've noticed you've been distracted lately," his mother began, her tone light but pointed. "Is there something you'd like to share?" his father added, his voice firm. Barron hesitated, his grip tightening on the edge of the table. "I've been spending time with someone." His mother's eyebrows rose. "Someone? She's not like us," he admitted, bracing himself. "She's smart, talented, and kind. And I care about her." His father's expression darkened. "Barron, you have a responsibility to this family, to our name. You can't throw that away for a fleeting infatuation." "It's not fleeting," Barron said quietly, his voice steady. His mother's voice softened, but her words cut deep. "The world won't accept this, Barron. You're setting yourself, and her, up for heartbreak." As the conversation ended, Barron retreated to his room, torn between the life he was expected to lead and the one he wanted to create with Mia. The lake was serene, the water reflecting the moonlight in soft ripples. Barron waited on a wooden dock, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He turned at the sound of footsteps, his heart quickening as Mia emerged from the trees. "You weren't followed?" he asked, half joking. She shook her head. "You're the one who's risking more." They sat side by side, their legs dangling over the water. The night was cool, but the warmth of her presence was enough. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this mess," Barron said, his voice low. "You didn't drag me," she replied. "I chose to be here." He looked at her, his usual guarded expression giving way to vulnerability. "I don't know how to fix this, Mia, but I know I don't want to lose you." She reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "We'll figure it out. Together." Under the vast night sky, they shared their first kiss, a quiet promise that they would fight for each other, no matter the odds. The Trump family dining room was heavy with tension. Barron stood at the head of the table, his parents seated across from him. The rest of the family watched in stunned silence as he spoke. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice firm. I'm not going to live by your rules anymore. His father's face turned red with anger. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Your legacy, your future. My future is my own to decide, Barron interrupted. And I choose Mia. His mother's voice cracked. Do you realize what this will do to us? To her? Barron's resolve wavered, but only for a moment. What kind of life is it if it's built on someone else's terms? The argument raged on, voices rising and falling like waves in a storm. By the end, Barron was left standing alone in the room, his heart heavy, but his determination unshaken. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Mia's apartment was small but cozy, filled with mismatched furniture and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. The walls were adorned with her sketches, each one bursting with life and emotion. It was a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the gilded halls Barron had stormed out of hours earlier. The sound of urgent knocking startled Mia. She opened the door to find Barron, his tie undone, hair disheveled, and eyes clouded with exhaustion. Barron, she said, surprised. What are you doing here? I had to see you, he replied, stepping inside before she could protest. I couldn't stay there anymore. He paced the small living room, his frustration palpable. They don't understand. They never will. All they care about is the family name, the image. It's suffocating. Mia watched him silently before speaking. Barron, sit down. Reluctantly, he dropped onto the couch, his shoulders sagging. She sat beside him, her voice soft but firm. You have to think about what you're doing. This isn't just about us. It's about everything you're leaving behind. I don't care about that anymore, he said, his voice breaking. I care about you. About us. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I care about you too. But you can't make this decision out of anger. You need to be sure. He reached for her hand, his grip desperate. I am sure, Mia. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She leaned her forehead against his, their breaths mingling in the quiet of the room. Then we'll find a way, she whispered. But you have to be ready for the fight. The city gallery buzzed with excitement. People milled about, sipping wine and admiring the artwork on display. In the center of it all was Mia, her face glowing with pride and disbelief. Barron stood in a shadowed corner, his cap pulled low and a scarf obscuring his features. He had slipped in unnoticed, unwilling to draw attention. His eyes were fixed on Mia's section of the exhibit, a collection of pieces that seemed to capture the very essence of life, raw and beautiful. He watched as she explained her work to an older couple, her hands gesturing passionately. She belonged here, in this world of creativity and expression. He felt a swell of pride and something deeper, an unshakable resolve. As the evening wore on, Barron slipped out unnoticed. His mind was made up. Supporting Mia's dreams was no longer a question, it was a certainty. He would break free from his gilded cage, no matter the cost. The Trump family boardroom was as imposing as ever, its long mahogany table flanked by chairs filled with his family and advisors. The air was heavy with tension as Barron entered, his steps deliberate. I have something to say, he began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. All eyes turned to him, curiosity and apprehension etched on their faces. I'm stepping away from the family's obligations, he declared. I won't be part of this anymore. The room erupted into chaos. His father stood, his voice booming. Do you understand what you're saying? This isn't a choice. It's your responsibility. Barron held his ground, his voice steady. It's not my responsibility to live a life I don't believe in. His mother's eyes filled with tears. You're throwing everything away. For what? For her? For love, Barron said, his tone soft but unwavering. For a life that's mine to live. The room fell silent, the weight of his words set. Ing over them. Barron turned and walked out, leaving behind the world he had always known. The countryside chapel was small and unassuming, its wooden pews filled with close friends and a few allies who believed in their love. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting soft colors over the room. Barron stood at the altar, dressed in a simple suit, his eyes fixed on the door. When Mia appeared, walking down the aisle in a flowing white dress, he felt his breath catch. She was radiant, her smile more genuine than anything he had ever known. They exchanged vows under the gentle gaze of the officiant, their words heartfelt and unpolished, spoken from the depths of their souls. "I promise to love you, to fight for us, and to build a life we can both be proud of," Barron said, his voice steady. "And I promise to stand by you, to share my dreams with you, and to believe in us no matter what," Mia replied, her voice thick with emotion. As they kissed, the room erupted in applause, a celebration of a love that had defied every obstacle. Outside the chapel, the world waited. But for now, there was only hope, only triumph, only the promise of a future they would create together, bound not by expectations, but by love beyond limits.